everyone. I'm Jennifer Hollinshead. Welcome to Redefining Resilience. This is our interview series, and this is the first one today. And so I'm super nervous and super excited. And so today we're going to be talking about and digging into lesser known narratives and ideas of what it really means to be resilient, because the word resilience is being kind of rammed down our throats right now with this pandemic and how we have to bounce back from everything and we have to be resilient. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm gonna let you know who our guest is right here. We have Cicely Blain with us today, and thank you so much for being here. I'm wondering if I should put us on gallery view for this, or
that's a good point.
Okay, I'll put us on gallery view, even though that means that I have to look at myself, which is less than ideal, but that's okay. So welcome, Cicely, and thank you so much for being willing to be our first trial run here. We're going to be talking about some stuff that you've been through that's been tough and how you've been resilient. But first, I want to tell people who you are and why we have you here. Before we get to that, I'll just do a landing statement, which is to acknowledge that the land that I'm on right now, which is now known as Vancouver, British Columbia, was and is the unceded stolen territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations of Indigenous people. And one of the reasons why we do a landing statement to acknowledge the stolen land that we're on is just as a start to the process of reconciliation. And I really encourage people to figure out the land that you're on and the Indigenous people who it was taken from, and just educate yourself a little bit more. So we're going to have links to how to do that. There's an awesome site called landback.org that talks about Indigenous sovereignty and liberation. There's a website called nativeland.ca where you can figure out, it's a map of territories. So I'd really encourage you to learn more. And with that, I think, Cicely, you're on the same territory that I'm on. So we're together.
Yes, that's right.
Not apart.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I was like, we were joking about this before we started recording, but I didn't know how to introduce you because you're such a rock star, essentially. So I am looking at your about page right now. So I'm just going to introduce Cicely with a lot of the history about who they are. So Cicely, consultant, facilitator, writer, artist from London, graduated from University of British Columbia with a modern European studies and a minor in Russian language. Mm-hmm. Being a queer person of mixed heritage, talking about it being important for you to stand up for those who experience discrimination and oppression in schools, workplaces, and society, and started as an activist in your teenage years, got a huge grant to make a community center, got a whole bunch of young women of distinction award from the YWCA, coolest people who call Vancouver home. Did you get, I think, 40 under 40 or BC Business? There's been a lot of things that you have been up to. You also happen to do a TEDx talk. So tell me, Cicely, after all of that, what did I miss?
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much covered it. I'm an activist and consultant originally from London. I am the author of a book called Burning Sugar and the editorial director of a magazine called Ripple of Change, which inspires people to be activists, to find their place in the movement and to give back and be part of change. And yeah, I just kind of, well, for the past year, I've just been sitting here doing those things. But yeah, it's really great to be here with you, and I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, and I also have to, full transparency. We've been working together, in a certain capacity for a little while because we brought your consulting firm on to do our first annual diversity and inclusion audit of our practice, of our counseling practice. And so the reason I wanted to do that, and thank you so much for all of your help with that, but is so that we can, because there's social justice and mental health are hand in hand. And so I know as a counselor myself, but I was also born a white cis het woman, kind of upper middle class. And so what we're really trying to do is learn about all the things we don't know about, and all of our things that, I guess, deprogramming that we need to do. So that's how you and I know each other. And yeah, I'm so excited that we actually get to dig into something like semi-vulnerable today, because I feel like this is like I actually get to talk to you, not about business stuff. So I guess my first question is, what is something that you have gone through or are going through that you have deemed to be very difficult? And yeah, and let's get into it. Let's talk about kind of the history of it, and then we'll talk about the crappy parts of it essentially, and then sort of what we learned. So what do you want to talk about today in terms of tough stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, something that I've been, it's an ongoing thing, of course, but I think I first realized that I was queer when I was probably about 11 or 12. But, high school is high school, and I felt very much that I needed to conform to specific expectations. And, everybody was getting a boyfriend, and I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And I think that really sort of, without me even really knowing it, actually did define a lot of my teenage years. And only really upon reflection do I realize that, because I think, if you were to ask my high school friends, they would say that I was popular and outgoing and, confident and, self-assured. But I think a lot of that was actually a sort of front for what I was holding inside, which was both queer identity, but also like being a mixed race person, and feeling these challenges of not really fitting into any particular space or community. And then when I came here to Vancouver, and I came to university and kind of like took that as an opportunity to come out, but like to also sort of reinvent myself, and moving basically halfway across the world. But I didn't quite achieve my desire to actually use this as an opportunity to kind of like be my full queer self. And I actually kind of ended up kind of almost going back into the closet in a sense, because of the communities that I ended up spending time with, where still queerness was not validated and not accepted. And I kind of felt like, especially as a Black person in Vancouver, it's very difficult to find community. And so when you do find community, well, I kind of felt like I had to do, whatever was possible to fit in and to be included, and to keep this safe community. And that meant sacrificing again that queer part of myself. And then that kind of, when I eventually did get the sort of courage and opportunity to come out, I then felt like there were a lot of expectations around what a queer person looks like, or how a queer person is supposed to behave. And as someone who's always been very feminine and really in touch with my feminine side, I felt like there was an expectation for queer AFAB people who are assigned female at birth to be more masculine or to be more androgynous. And so I kind of like went through this time of, I don't know, it was kind of, when I look back at it now, it's kind of almost ironic that I'm finding this freedom But then there's a new set of rules, there's a new set of constraints that I'm now coming up against. So I think finally now, you know, in my late 20s, I'm actually realizing that there's, you know, these rules don't have to apply, and I can, you know, express myself however I like, and that does not invalidate my identity. And I think that's given me, it's been a long journey, almost, yeah, like over 15 years of this journey of trying to get to this place of um, feeling free and not feeling inhibited by sort of societal expectations, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And my question follow up to that is, I mean, this might be obvious, but for you, why is it important to be free? Like, what will that allow you to do?
I think specifically for me, when I look back at especially how I was as a teenager, I was not very nice. Like I really, for me, it really manifested in a lot of rage and frustration about everything. I mean, when you're a teenager, you already feel like the world is against you, but when you add to that being Black and being queer, in a lot of ways, the world actually is against you and against your survival. Obviously, I didn't have the language for that at the time, but when I look back, it really did manifest for me in being um yeah, just angry at the world, and but not having the avenue to express that, and that manifesting in, you know, me kind of hurting other people or destroying relationships or pushing people away. um and yeah, it wasn't until I grew up and I had the opportunity to go to therapy and find community and, you know, find a supportive partner and, you know, have conversations with my parents that I never got to have before, that I was able to feel um, a sense of ownership of my own identity. Like it felt like I was no longer being, you know, I was no longer trying to fit into other people's scripts or other people's expectations. I was feeling, yeah, a sense of freedom that allowed me to be a better person, internally and externally, like be nicer and more compassionate to myself, but also um, be a much more engaged member of my community, and you know, make amends to people that I'd hurt before, and um, to, yeah, just have a much more kind of compassionate and generous outlook on the world. And so I would say that's kind of, yeah, for me, that's why it's been so crucial to get to this place in my life, because I wasn't just hurting myself, I was also hurting others in this process.
And that's such a, first of all, thank you for admitting that, because you know, that's probably not a fun thing to admit, like, oh, I hurt people and I was ragey and all of those things. And one of the things we talk a lot about in counseling here, and I experienced this myself, is, you know, all the judgments about my like bad coping. There's good coping and there's bad coping. And the bad coping is, you know, when I'm pushing people away and when I'm like confrontational and when I'm ragey for no reason. And there can be a lot of, I use quotes there for no reason, just if you're only noticing the audio here. But I guess what I'm wondering is, knowing, okay, you hurt people and you push people away and you had struggles that way, looking back on those behaviors, um, what do you think about them now?
um I think for a long time I was quite embarrassed,
Yeah.
but I think I'm coming to the point of forgiving myself for, you know, kind of realizing that I think for a long time I felt a lot of shame around that. And, you know, I'm still friends with a lot of people from high school, and I'm very grateful that they have remained my friends, because I wasn't always nice to them. And I think I do feel a bit of anxiety and shame around how I behaved before, but yeah, I am also getting to a point of offering myself a little bit of grace and a little bit of forgiveness, because yeah, I was coming up a lot of, against a lot of things. Also my parents' separation, and how that was impacting me, and you know having a blended family and all of the complications that come with that as well. And I think also kind of it was instilled in me from a very young age, like how privilege worked. And I had a very clear understanding of being middle class, and having generally a very fortunate experience. And so I think I didn't allow myself to feel any I didn't allow myself to feel any sort of forgiveness towards how I behaved, because I was like, in contrast to what other people are experiencing, in contrast to what my own family who live in other parts of the world are experiencing. um, I've always had it pretty easy, and so I didn't allow myself to offer any forgiveness. But now I recognize that those things can exist simultaneously. Like I can acknowledge my privilege and be grateful for the hands that I've been dealt in life, but also forgive myself for the specific hardships and trauma that I did experience. And both of those things can exist at the same time. So yeah, it's definitely still a journey. And when I look back, I do still cringe, but it's less shameful. It's more just and also, I don't know, I can't have been the worst teenager in the world. Like there's I think we all had ways that we acted out or lashed out, or we're just struggling with a world that's not really designed to there's just even with all the resources and infrastructure in the world, I think it's still a very confusing and complicated time in someone's life. So yeah, I'm trying to have some grace for that.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, going through it at the time, I'm just thinking about, getting to UBC and meeting a whole bunch of new people, and you're kind of excited because this is where you get to choose like what you let out and who you become and what your identity is. And then it sounds like you found yourself in a similar, trying to conform, trying to belong, but then that wasn't sitting well either. And so it's like this is a common theme that started when you were 11. And I'm wondering, we talk about that like fight and the things that you aren't super proud of doing, right? Maybe hurting people, but looking at the stuff that you weren't proud of doing, how, now that you're out of it, right? Hindsight is 2020, it's glorious. How do you think those behaviors of pushing people away and hurting people were actually part of your resilience?
Yeah, I definitely think they were. I think, yeah, if you were to, ask somebody I went to high school with, or even in my first couple of years of university, like to describe me, I think they would see me as, yeah, very confident and, fearless. And I think, yeah, it was definitely a self-protection mechanism, which allowed me to get through a lot of, yeah, really uncomfortable and painful situations. And I think, yeah, I think I'm trying to sort of tease apart the bad, and yeah, as you say, like the resilience. I think a lot of it was survival mechanisms. And yeah, now I think I'm kind of getting to a place where I see the value in what that time gave me. But yeah, it's definitely difficult to yeah, I think to kind of like differentiate between like, yeah, seeing it as resilience, because I think as you were saying at the beginning, the connotations of resilience, you know, it's kind of taken a life of its own and being used in very strange ways and being used in ways that I think are also very connected to like capitalism, and resilience has kind of become like continuing to uphold the status quo is what I think a lot of people are interpreting resilience as, like, oh, I'm resilient because I continue to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week in a pandemic, which I don't think that's what resilience is. So I'm having a hard time kind of holding on to the ways that time strengthened me. Because I think, that the idea of resilience has become such a complicated narrative, and I feel like I'm like wading through all of the nonsense to find like what it truly means to me and what that time actually gave me.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, resilience is the biggest buzzword, I think, of the year. And you know, when the pandemic happened and I started hearing resilience and resilience and resilience, I was like, oh, maybe this is good for business because our, you know, business name happens to have resilience in it. And then I just started getting so irritated. Something in me was being rubbed the wrong way. And I actually remember a blog post that I wrote, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, where I talked about what resilience is and what it is not, and how oftentimes the word resilience, the idea of like bouncing back after adversity, right? Sometimes, depending on who's using that word, it can be weaponized. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times it's weaponized against the environment, right? In the environmental field, they look at landscapes and they look at geographical resilience based on how much they can extract from that land, but without making it totally useless, right? So, and they do that with humans too. Like, oh, you're working during a pandemic, even when you are barely walking, you're so resilient, good work.
Yeah.
And I think now too, there's an idea of like marketing resilience, like, you know, you have to do this and this and this to be more resilient. And so that's one of the questions that I kind of ask people is like, you know, oftentimes the process of becoming resilient or feeling resilient is pretty fucking ugly. And then and we're looking at resilience like, oh, it's like the shiny version of you after you've gone through something. But that's not what it is. It's the gross stuff too. And so what I'm wondering is, what was thinking about, you know, when you're 11, starting to wrestle with things and you're only a kid, you don't even have the language, and then kind of UBC, and now it sounds like you're coming up against different things. I guess what I'm wondering for you in this process of sort of being free, what has the hardest part of it all been for you?
I would say trying not to fall back into that place, because I kind of feel like it's sort of right there. It's like, it's very close. And I think, again, what this idea of resilience is about, you overcome something and you just throw it all away. As you say, like you've become this like shiny new version and it's all over. But really, it's actually kind of like this darkness is like very present all the time. And the possibility of falling back into, bad coping mechanisms, or unhelpful coping mechanisms, is always there. And I think, that for me is a challenge, especially during the pandemic, where it's just like you're under this constant uncertainty, grief, stress. It's, I think, people are talking about it, but I don't think people are really talking enough about how this is a time of like ongoing like trauma for a lot of people. And I think the sort of ever presence of those feelings, because it can be triggered at any time, where I'm like, a lot of it for me was like my physical appearance, and trying to conform to not only like white beauty standards and straight beauty standards, but then also queer beauty standards, and then like gender stereotypes, gender norms, like like thinness, and all of these things that I was trying to conform to, and that my physical body did not fit into. And that can be really activated at any time, when I'm out and somebody looks at me a certain way, or somebody assumes my pronouns, or somebody assumes my sexual orientation. And for them, it's just a small, usually a mistake, usually just an unintended slight. But for me, it could trigger this whole past decade of self-work. So I think that's how I kind of think about it, is like it's a journey that I think is probably your whole life. And I think you can do certain things so that sort of darkness gets further and further away, but I don't think it's ever I don't think it's ever completely gone until like society has completely changed, so that there is no longer this status quo or this expectation to conform to all of these different boxes that we create.
Yeah, and okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like one of the hardest parts for you is not being able to control when you are harmed.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, when your mind starts spinning with the last 10 years of work that you've been doing within yourself, and you just can never really know like when someone's gonna misgender you, or
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of this quote by Chester M. Pierce, who's the person who coined the term microaggressions. He says that he's specifically talking about race, but he says that like white folks are completely unaware of the potential that they have to cause harm at any moment. And I think that's so powerful, because it's like, yeah, as a person of color, like you, or as a queer person, or anyone who's experienced some form of marginalization, some part of you, even if you're very self-confident and self-assured, some part of you is always on edge, knowing that at any point some form of systemic oppression could be weaponized against you. And again, sometimes intentionally, but in order to keep things in check as they are, to keep power structures as they are, somebody could say something like, something that to a cisgender person, for example, like misgendering or using the wrong pronouns would not be a big deal to them, because it's not a big deal. But misgendering a trans or non-binary person, you're reminding them that society doesn't accept them. You're reminding them of all this past trauma, and this small thing can send you spiraling. And I think that sort of ongoing sort of power dynamic is what I think is so exhausting. And I think about that quote a lot, this kind of like how people with privilege are just completely unaware of that at any time they can, even unknowing to themselves, actually be weaponizing power over others. And even with like a best friend or a family member or someone you deeply trust, can at any moment shift the sort of palpable power dynamics in a space to tell you that you don't belong, or to tell you that your voice doesn't matter, or to take you back to that place where you felt worthless. And I think that contributes to a lot of the sort of exhaustion and just ongoing anxiety that I think a lot of marginalized folks feel on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And one of the things we talk about is even the word marginalized, right? Like people in the margins, or however we're going to define that, wondering if we could even shift the language to say targeted populations, because they are being actively targeted. It's not a coincidence. It's not just being in the margins, right? And I think I wonder what that's like for you to shift that, what that feels like.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's yeah, it's on purpose. And when we talk about, things like race or gender being a social construct, I think people sometimes interpret that as, because it's a social construct, that means it's made up, so therefore it doesn't matter. But what it actually means is, yeah, at some point in history, people with power intentionally made these categories and made these hierarchies. And now, as a result, all of us are complicit in continuing to uphold and support these, yeah, these social constructs, but very real lived experiences.
Yeah. And one of the things that I'm super intrigued about is that your lived experience has influenced your passion for work so much, right? And so I guess I'm wondering for you, when did that start? When did you decide I'm gonna start helping to educate people on these exact issues that I'm being harmed by?
Um, hmm. Well, after I graduated from university, I started working at Community, which is BC's Queer and Trans Resource Centre. And well, actually, before that, I had a summer job while I was at UBC, working with Camp Out, which is a camp for queer and trans youth, and such an amazing opportunity. Like it will always have such a dear place in my heart. And I really felt like I felt like with that experience, for the most part, I wasn't quite ready for it. Like essentially the responsibility was to be supporting queer and trans youth, but I myself was a queer and trans youth. So it was a lot. And but something kind of kept me attached to that, which is why I then applied to work for Community after graduating. Um, and I think I wasn't quite in the right place for that. But then, so then kind of took some time off. I went back home to live with my parents for 6 months, and I was like, okay, I need to kind of recalibrate, what I'm doing with my life, and like, why is this calling me? But at the same time, why do I find it so difficult? And how can I do this in a way where it's not extremely emotionally draining every day? And I think that's kind of what led me to start my business, because I got to sort of define the narrative, and I got to be in control. I think that, the lack of control in my life was something that, in hindsight, I realized was activating a lot of, shame and fear and frustration. So yeah, reclaiming that control, and also the creativity to, yeah, design workshops and design new projects around things that I thought were important, and also add in the anti-racism element to, or also doing LGBTQ inclusion and other, general DEI content. But yeah, I think the control over my work time and my who I work with, and I'm very fortunate to now be in a position where I can be very discerning about who I work with. Like you know, if you mistreat me or one of my team members, we don't have to work with you. And that's a huge privilege to get to a place of being able to make decisions like that. But I think that's what I've always really needed, is getting to choose who comes in and out of my life, both personally and professionally. So yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy work, but I also do see it as kind of a calling. Like I see it as a responsibility, as someone who is a lighter skinned Black person and someone who has other privileges. I kind of, see it as a responsibility to do that work where other people maybe can't, because of how emotionally uh, intense it can be. Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, like, you could have just not touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but instead you kind of move towards it, and moving towards the hard work. And so I'm wondering kind of how that has helped you in your journey, and maybe other side, how it has been difficult.
Well, I think growing up in Britain, people do not talk about their emotions whatsoever. So I think this experience, the way that I kind of approach, like I remember the first time I went to therapy, I was annoyed after the first session because I was like, okay, so what's the diagnosis? Like, how do I fix this? Like, okay, is it done now? And I was kind of approaching things from this very like solutions oriented logistical lens, which is a lot of the way that my brain works. So I think for me, actually being able to like build solutions to things is really helpful. And being like, a client being like, okay, we've had this issue of racism in the organization. And I can be like, okay, here's some strategies, here's a workshop, here's some policies, and to actually be able to provide solutions, obviously not fix all problems, but like provide solutions, I think makes me feel hopeful that there is change. And yeah, I think also helped me to in some ways process my own experiences, because I have such a amazing insight into so many, it's part of my job to read books and to check Twitter and to watch TikToks and watch YouTube videos and listen to podcasts about people's experiences so that I can continue to learn and grow as a professional. But that's also helping me personally. And I think, yeah, as someone who was taught no emotional processing skills growing up, that to approach things through that lens of I'm educating myself to better my work, but also in the process it's bettering me as a person, and it's bettering my my growth and my journey, I think has been helpful.
Wow. Is there a time in this process that you thought to yourself, like, I definitely do not feel resilient right now?
I mean, definitely in this pandemic. I think, yeah, I really have felt like, especially after the murder of George Floyd last summer, and how society really kind of exploded around attention to that, which was both great, but also extremely overwhelming for anybody, well, for all Black people, but also especially activists and consultants and anti-racist educators. And basically from June until now, I've been doing, sometimes up to 10 workshops a week. And I just feel like a robot, like, repeating a lot of the same content. And it has meant that some of the joy has been lost. So I'm kind of in this process now of reclaiming my time and reclaiming control, which is important to me, and kind of going back to the drawing board and setting better boundaries and saying no more often. And but yeah, I did definitely feel like in the fall, as we hit like our first pandemic winter, and I was like, oof, I don't know, like this is hard, and I don't feel as resilient, and it felt like a lot of the hope was lost in terms of like feeling like there's no end in sight and missing family and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely feel like I'm on the tail end of that, but I also feel like very ready for the pandemic to be over.
Gosh, absolutely. Yeah. Same here, obviously. And yeah, that's something that we talk about all the time, is just, Well, and you touched on it too, is just like going, dealing with the difficult issues that you would already be dealing with and working on during this pandemic, and the length of time that we're all in it for has been pretty mind-blowing. And so you got to a point in the fall and winter where you didn't feel like you had control over your schedule, and you were just doing a gazillion workshops and being a robot. And so how did you get, now it's February 2021. So what was the process of shifting out of that mode for you?
Um, well, I saw a TikTok, which is basically mostly how most of my revelations begin, is I saw a TikTok. But this person was talking about how, a lot of what kind of sends us into that downward spiral, or how is when every day starts to feel the same. And especially as a Sagittarius and as somebody who's like, I love to travel, I love to try new things. I think it's the lack of change that's really bringing me down during this time. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna start just trying something new every now and again. Bought myself a Nintendo Switch, tried some new games, just like trying to bring some excitement back into my life. And also, it's so hard. I already had work-life balance issues before the pandemic, but now that the work is happening at home, it's like there is no separation. So I really had to put in a lot of effort to actually very intentionally and purposefully make that distinction between, okay, now I'm working, now I'm not working. And I think that has definitely helped somewhat. And I think, and also it being Black History Month, I'm seeing a lot of, because basically, I feel like we went through this period of time where it was like, okay, everybody started to talk about BLM. And then for the next like 6 to 8 months, it was all about anti-racism, which is often about trauma. It's about, violence that the Black community is experiencing. So every day you're like seeing videos being shared, and it's all about basically regurgitating the trauma that Black folks experience. But I feel now that it's Black History Month, obviously that anti-racism element is still important, but I do feel like there's a more celebratory lens to it, which means, people are sharing like Black icons and Black heroes, and like just that has, kind of given me a bit more of a boost, and like put a bit more, reminds me why I do this work, is that, there is so much to be celebrated, and there's so much inspiration out there. So I'm trying to hold on to that, and remind myself to not just kind of go into a trauma spiral, but also to celebrate the heroes, and celebrate the activists and the change as well.
Yeah, and I'm hearing the theme of hope in there, and celebration and hope. And I was, coming in today to our office and thinking, like, what actually is resilience? We're talking about what it's not. It's not just about being shiny and bouncing back and everything's fine. And I was like, well, what are we saying it is then? And how do people become resilient? And what does it look like? And I thought a lot about flexibility and comfort with discomfort. And when I say comfort with discomfort, I don't mean like, oh, this discomfort is so nice. It's like, no, like you can like grit your teeth and bear it, basically. But what I'm hearing you say is pretty interesting, because one of your coping strategies, correct me if I'm wrong, is working and like being productive. And, you did a great job of that in all of your 20s and your teens. And then you hit this point in your consulting business, which technically is like, like the stars align. You're so busy. You're doing 10 workshops a week. Like, that's amazing. But then you're noticing that it actually is sucking the life out of you. And so what was the period of time when you noticed that it was sucking the life out of you before you were like, that's it, I'm getting a Nintendo?
Yeah, I think like it's very, very hard. I'm sure you can relate. Like when you start your own business, in the beginning, you're very much acting from like a scarcity mindset where you're like, I have to accept every client, I have to do everything possible to, pay the bills and keep things afloat. And it's extremely difficult to get out of that mindset, even when you are making profit or you are, or you do have enough to get by. And I think even though I could have come to that realization much earlier, I think that will always be there to some extent, that it's very, very difficult to say no, because you're like, okay, what if this is the last person that ever reaches out and I've said no and that's it? Even though, logically I know that's ridiculous, but it's really hard to get out of that mindset. But I think I finally kind of, reached this point of like, well, I have I think it was about trust as well. Like I have a very capable team, and I was like, if I do a few less workshops a week, the world is not going to end. And I also try to educate my clients about how there is really no, like, to me, like there's lots of things that are horrible about the corporate world, but I think the sense of urgency around things that are not actually urgent is really frustrating to me. And, people expecting like these rapid turnarounds, which just make no sense. And I'm like, hello, are you not also in this pandemic? Like, it is not urgent that I return this document to you. Like, what's going to happen if I don't return this document to you tomorrow? So like trying to kind of decolonize my own brain around that, but then also practice what I preach and set those expectations with clients, I think has helped. And yeah, just kind of preparing myself, reminding myself that, it will be okay. Like it will always be okay. And, um, even if you do lose some clients or whatever, like in the long run, if I don't rest and if I don't take a break, I won't be able to even do the work in the future anyway. So yeah, I mean, I'm still, that's a very present situation. Like I'm still trying to convince myself of that. So, so yeah, it's hard.
It is hard. And I guess that's the point that I'm making, right? Is that it is hard, it's ongoing, it's messy. And, the go-to coping strategies that used to work for you got to the point where, they became overused, right? And you had to say, I'm wondering, just to interrupt myself, I'm wondering who helped you with that realization, or if it was just on your own.
Um, I would say, yeah, friends and team members who keep reminding me to take a break and, offering to take things off my plate. And um, yeah, kind of like, I think it comes with, you know, other forms of like financial and, you know, logistical security, which makes it possible to let go a little bit. But I think, yeah, it's just really helpful to have folks who are like, messaging me and like, why are you still working? It's 11 p.m. Like, just stop. And sometimes I think also like another thing that TikTok has helped me with is like learning more about like um, ADHD and how like a lot of my, when I get into like hyper focus mode, I can literally just like sit for hours, not even like eat or pee or anything. And then the day has gone by and I'm like, oh my God, like how did that happen? So trying to learn more about like, yeah, healthy coping strategies for that, because otherwise, yeah, if I really get into a task, like a day will just go by and I haven't even nourished my body. So just trying to like
Like,
be more present and like have folks check in with me has been really helpful.
absolutely. Well, and it sounds like you've surrounded yourself with people who are trying to have some semblance of balance themselves. And
Mhm.
I absolutely identify with that. Like sometimes my team is like, okay, maybe just take a breath and yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I guess one of the things I'm looking at my cheat sheet here. This is a weird question, I think. But and maybe now that you're sort of talking about it and it's hindsight, looking at your struggle and your fight essentially to be free with your identity and with who you are, um, for you, what meaning do you make from that struggle and how you got through it?
Hmm. I would say that, yeah, I think it always sticks with me. This one time, a close friend of mine, she said she said to me, your greatest ability is to show up in spaces that aren't ready for you. And that has always really stuck with me. It was such a powerful statement of, because I didn't even realize I was doing that at the time. I think she was specifically referring to, yeah, sort of being openly queer in a pretty sort of religious conservative space. And um, I was kind of doing it unknowingly, but now I do it more on purpose. And I think that has really, yeah, that has really stuck with me as the sort of the meaning of all of this is, um, sometimes, yeah, you just have to be, like, it's so cheesy, but you just have to be yourself. And um, that obviously comes with all of the trauma and the pain to get there. But yeah, and that's what drives my activism and my writing and my work is people deserve to show up freely and to not have to sacrifice any part of who they are. And I think a lot of people and a lot of organizations think that, oh yeah, of course we're creating an inclusive space, but it's not just about the space, it's about like the whole universe, right? Like the whole world has all of these narratives, these expectations, these rules, these status quos, these things that we will probably never even understand in a lifetime. And the more in the margins you are, the more social pressure there is to conform to these specific lenses. And I think, while partly, of course, the work is deconstructing systemic oppression, another really important part of the work is just letting people be free, right? Like that's more immediately available, I would say, is to not judge or exclude or isolate people either directly or indirectly for the way that they choose to express themselves or the way that their body is or the way that their brain works and all of these things.
Mm-hmm. And when I have to just jump into your book for a second, which is right behind you there, Burning Sugar. Speaking of, being free and allowing yourself to be fully seen, and I mean, I read through your poems in Burning Sugar, and my mind was blown. And so I guess what I'm wondering is part of part of your resilience and kind of moving through things is taking the pain and finding a solution to sort of better it or change it or move it, some sort of movement, right? To not get stuck. And and in all of the things that you've talked about today, I think that's a theme that I've noticed is shifting the pain and turning it into some sort of action that allows you to feel at least like you have more control and agency and choice. And so I'm just wondering, is there any poems in Burning Sugar that are sort of more about this struggle specifically, or?
Yeah, let me see. I would say, where is it?
I read through and I was just like, this is, first of all, gorgeous writing. And I feel like I know you a lot better now, a little bit. But yeah, just noticed that just how beautiful it all was.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's one called Unapologetically Queer that I think is, actually, maybe I could share two of these.
Yes, please.
They're right next to each other, and I think they lean into what we've been talking about today. Okay, so the first one is Step on a Crack, Break Your Back. I was 15 the first time I looked up. I had memorized the cracks in the pavement like Bible passages. I would walk, one foot in front of the other, head down, spine beginning to curve the wrong way, eyes trained half a meter in front, calves aching with tension. So focused on being invisible, I forgot how to see at all. And then the second one is called Unapologetically Queer. 1. Queer desire was burning a hole in my chest pocket. I don't know how to live a half life. I am not radioactive decay, atomic instability. It would be 200 years short of my potential. I had to teach myself how to love unapologetically, to exist in spaces that weren't ready for my reverberating heart. 2. I would be years late to realizing half of the people I loved had walked out on me because I'm queer.
I just wrote down, so focused to be invisible, I forgot to see, which that to me is the line that sticks out as this conversation today. You know, and like what am I seeing, and what do I want, and who am I, and how do I want to be, and like even being able to ask those questions, I think even allows for a sense of freedom to even allow yourself to ask those questions. So I guess I'm wondering what, if anything, you would say to someone who's maybe a little bit younger, kind of going through the mud of this process and not feeling resilient and excited about it. What would you want to say to someone?
I think what I would want to say, well, I guess what I would like to have heard is that it's not you, it's them. Like, it's not, I think we really do, so many people, everyone at some point thinks that they're not enough or they don't fit in, and it's everyone else. Like, it's, I think a lot of people have said to me, like, thank you for showing up as you are and being unapologetic and being fearless, which I never really intended to do. I didn't intend to become any kind of like symbol or anything like that, but I do think, yeah, as that friend said, that sort of innate ability to just show up. And I think part of it was like being a little bit oblivious, like if people were judging me or talking behind my back, I was just like not noticing, which I guess is good. But yeah, I think I wish I had known that sooner. Like, I remember in high school, one of my best friends was also queer, and she came out in like 9th grade, I think. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, like that's so brave, and I can't do that right now. But I think she changed a lot of things in the whole school, really. Like, we had never seen a queer couple in school, and it was pretty transformative. So I think, even just by existing, you're inspiring other people, and just by being fearless and being true to who you are, people who you don't know are watching and are seeing that something they didn't believe was possible is possible. um yeah, so I guess that's what I would say.
That's awesome. And okay, so you've got so much stuff going on. I want to sort of eventually get into the wrapping up. I feel like I could just talk about this all day, but we do have other things. You have a lot of other things to do. First of all, I would just like to say, like, thank you for sharing all of this, because I know that it is vulnerable, and you talk about being fearless, and I'm wondering if there was a little bit of fear this morning. I was scared.
Oh
Um,
yeah, definitely. Definitely.
so we both did something with fear, with a lot of fear today. So thank you for that. But I would also ask, what was this like today? Looking back on all of this stuff and talking about it. How was this for you?
This was great because I feel like I don't spend enough time kind of slowing down and actually reflecting on how far I've come. And I think a lot of times I still internally view myself as being like 15. So it's nice to actually realize that I have actually grown a lot since then. And um, that potentially people will watch this and feel inspired, or, realize that you never quite, your experiences define you, but that doesn't always have to mean they define you negatively. And yeah, so this has been really cool to actually explore that and to think about how I'm maybe not as sort of trapped in that mentality as I thought I was. Yeah. So thanks.
Yeah, well, and thank you so much for sharing all of this. And so, and that back there is Ripple of Change magazine, I think.
Yes, we have.
Okay, you want to hold that up so people can see? And where do they get that? They can.
So you can get this at rippleofchangemag.com. Yeah, it's 100-page magazine. It's very beautiful. And yeah, you can get Burning Sugar at arsenalpulppress.com.
Awesome. And just your general website is?
So our website is currently cicelyblaineconsulting.com, but we are soon rebranding to be bakauconsulting.com.
Oh, nice. Oh, what's that rebrand all about? What was that process?
Yeah, so because the team has grown and it's kind of got a life of its own and sort of moved beyond just being me, we wanted to kind of expand it. Bakau is a place in the Gambia where my family is from, and it's a beautiful seaside town. So I thought, especially in these times, it's nice to imagine we were all on the beach somewhere. So yeah, that our new branding will be launching soon.
Okay, awesome. Now, whenever I see Bakau, that is what I will
Exactly.
vision. Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure, and thank you again. I love working with you, and this was an awesome interview. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.